Sam Neill, the actor who made Dr. Alan Grant a Jurassic Park icon, has died at 78. As Laura Dern, Steven Spielberg, Jeff Goldblum, and others pay tribute, the franchise family is mourning. Stay with this story to hear what they said and how his passing changed the legacy of Jurassic Park. The news broke on a Monday morning. In a short statement posted to Sam Neill's own Instagram page, his family used the Maori word for extended family, whānau, to describe who was sharing the news. "It is with immense sadness that the whānau of Sam Neill share the news of his passing," said the statement posted to the actor's Instagram page. He was 78 years old, and he died in Sydney, Australia. The family described the loss as sudden and unexpected, but said it came with the small comfort that Sam remained cancer-free. No cause of death was given. No cause of death was shared by the actor's family in the statement announcing his passing. That detail, cancer-free, mattered because Neill had spent the better part of 4 years talking publicly about a blood cancer diagnosis. And everyone who knew him assumed that was the fight that would eventually catch up with him. It didn't. He'd actually beaten it. Neill had battled a rare and aggressive form of blood cancer, but revealed in April he was cancer-free, which is part of why the tributes that followed carried a specific kind of shock. This wasn't a slow goodbye. It was a phone call nobody expected to get. Within hours, the people who built their careers alongside him started responding. Laura Dern, who played Dr. Ellie Sattler across 3 of his Jurassic movies, called him something more than a co-star. She called the actor a beloved lifetime friend as well as a true and noble gentleman, wrapped up in my dream-leading man. She closed her statement addressing him directly by the name most of the world knew him by. "I will love you forever, Dr. Alan Grant," she wrote, using his character's name the way you'd use a nickname for someone you'd known 30 years. Steven Spielberg, the man who cast Neill as Alan Grant in the first place back in 1993, put out his own statement calling the actor exceptional to work with. "Sam was exceptionally collaborative," Spielberg said in a statement. "It was a stretch for him to play a character who acted as though children were smelly and messy, because this was the opposite of the loving father he was to his children." Spielberg then widened the frame to include the 2 other actors who'd stood beside Neill in every single Jurassic movie he ever made. "Along with Laura Dern and Jeff Goldblum, we will always have our Jurassic family, and Sam will never be forgotten by us or his many millions of fans around the world." And then came Carl Urban, a fellow New Zealander who didn't post a formal statement so much as leave a comment straight on the family's own Instagram post, the way you'd write something in a guest book. Urban said Neill was an inspiration for many who followed in his trailblazing footsteps. "A beautiful man, a national treasure who gave so much to New Zealand and to the world." 3 separate voices. 3 separate corners of Neill's life: his lead actress, his director, and a countryman who idolized him from a distance, all landing within the same news cycle. That's the shape of what happened this week. Now let's get into how it actually unfolded, hour by hour, and what it revealed about who Sam Neill was to the people who knew him best. The statement itself is worth sitting with for a second, because of how deliberately it was worded. Neill's family didn't lead with cause of death, or hospital details, or timeline. They led with gratitude for the fact that whatever ended his life, it wasn't the cancer everyone had been bracing for. It is with immense sadness that the whānau family of Sam Neill share the news of his passing on Monday, 13th July in Sydney, Australia. Sam was surrounded by family and passed with the dignity that has characterized his whole life, Neill's family said in a statement on Instagram. The statement went further, thanking the hospital staff who cared for him in his final hours. They would like to express their deepest gratitude to the staff at St. Vincent's Private Hospital for their incredible care. And they asked gently for space. More details will be shared later, but for now, on behalf of the family, we ask that you respect their privacy as they navigate this immeasurable loss. That combination, no cause given, sudden and unexpected, cancer-free, created a strange emotional knot for fans and colleagues alike. For years, the public narrative around Sam Neill had been a cancer story with a happy ending. He'd been diagnosed with a rare blood cancer, gone through brutal treatment, and then, earlier this year, told the world the disease was gone. Instead, his death arrived from somewhere else entirely, with no explanation attached. That vacuum is exactly what pulled his closest collaborators into public statements faster and more directly than they might have otherwise. Dern's tribute came first among the Jurassic cast, and it read less like a press release and more like something written in one sitting, fast, before anyone could talk her out of the specifics. She didn't just call him a friend, she used the word beloved, she used lifetime, and she built out exactly what he'd given her as a person, not just a scene partner. He showed me the depths of loyalty, protectiveness, and love, always with the driest of wit, the actress said in a statement. The choice to sign off as Dr. Alan Grant, rather than Sam, wasn't sentimental fluff. It was Dern acknowledging that for millions of people, and maybe even for herself after 3 decades of playing scenes with him, the character and the man had fused into one figure worth mourning twice over. Spielberg's statement carried a different weight, because Spielberg wasn't just remembering an actor he liked. He was remembering the decision that made Sam Neill's entire career trajectory possible. In his tribute, Spielberg traced back exactly how Neill ended up in front of him in the first place, crediting a string of earlier directors for putting Neill on his radar before Jurassic Park ever existed. Spielberg said, "I owe a debt of gratitude to Roger Donaldson, Gilliam Armstrong, Graham Baker, and Philip Noyce for casting Sam Neill in the roles in which he was so brilliant that brought him to my attention and led to his playing Dr. Alan Grant in Jurassic Park." That detail matters more than it looks like on the surface. Spielberg wasn't just praising Neill's talent in the abstract. He was tracing a direct line from other filmmakers' earlier faith in Neill, straight to the moment that made him globally famous. It's the kind of specific, almost bookkeeping-style tribute that tells you Spielberg had actually sat down and thought about Neill's career rather than just issuing a generic condolence. Then there's the detail about children. Spielberg's comment about Alan Grant's disdain for kids being a stretch for Neill because of how Neill actually was as a father wasn't filler. It was Spielberg pointing out the gap between the performance and the man. The same gap that made the character work in the first place. Grant's arc across Jurassic Park is literally about a man who starts out hating children and ends the film with 2 of them asleep on his shoulders. Spielberg was saying, essentially, that Neill had to act his way into that irritation because it wasn't in him to begin with. Word spread beyond the Jurassic circle almost immediately. Colin Trevorrow, who directed Neill in Jurassic World Dominion nearly a decade after the franchise's original trilogy had wrapped, posted his own tribute on Instagram, and his language shifted the tone from grief over a legend to grief over a friend who'd helped him personally through something hard. Trevorrow praised Neill as a deeply soulful and beautiful man, saying, "He was a friend and collaborator at a challenging time, and his strength gave us all strength. I'll remember him for his tranquility, his love of wine, and for the calm assuredness he brought to his characters. It's not every lifetime you get to befriend a legend. Forever grateful." A challenging time is doing a lot of work in that quote. Dominion was filmed in 2020 and 2021, in the thick of pandemic-era production shutdowns, travel restrictions, and constant testing protocols. Trevorrow was signaling that Neill wasn't just professionally reliable during that mess, he was someone the cast and crew leaned on emotionally to get through it. Even institutions weighed in, not just individuals. Universal Pictures, the studio behind the entire Jurassic franchise, posted its own short public message. "Rest in peace to our Jurassic legend, Sam Neill," Universal Pictures added in a post on X. It's a small detail, but it underlines how thoroughly Neill had become inseparable from that franchise in the corporate imagination too. Not just an actor they'd hired 3 times, but a figure the studio itself felt entitled to grieve publicly. By midday, what had started as a single-family statement had become a wave. Directors, co-stars, a studio, and as we'll get into next, an entire country's leadership. The reactions weren't scattered condolences. They followed a pattern. Everyone who spoke kept returning to the same 2 things, his talent and the fact that he made the people around him feel safe. That pattern is worth tracking, because it shows up again and again as the tributes moved outward from Hollywood to New Zealand to Australia to the rest of the world. Jeff Goldblum's connection to Neill goes back to the same film that made Dern's career, and it's a friendship with an almost eerie footnote attached to it. Just months before Neill's death, the two men had reunited in public, on stage together, and by all accounts, it was a warm, funny night. Neill posted about it himself at the time, joking about Goldblum having briefly forgotten his own most famous line from the franchise. Neill captioned the post about being on stage with J.F. Goldblum, calling it a privilege, and joking that poor Jeff had ostensibly lost his most famous line, "Life finds a way," adding, "So they persuaded me to help. Them words wrote large." He signed off calling it a bit of fun with my Pittsburgh pal, and told his followers to catch Goldblum's show if it ever came near them. That post now reads completely differently than it did the week it was published. It was one of Neill's last public appearances before his death, and it captured him exactly as everyone who knew him describes him: warm, self-deprecating, still clearly enjoying the absurdity of being a 78-year-old man forever associated with a killer velociraptor movie. Shortly before his sudden and unexpected death, Neill appeared to be in good health while attending a June award show and, during a recent reunion with Jeff Goldblum, seeming in great spirits during his final public appearances, just weeks after attending an award show in Australia and 2 months after that very public reunion with his former co-star. Goldblum himself, alongside Dern, was repeatedly invoked by name in Spielberg's own statement as one of the two people who'd remained part of Neill's Jurassic family for the full 3 decades. The director made clear that this wasn't a group of colleagues who drifted apart after 1993. It was an ongoing relationship that had lasted and reconvened across 4 separate movies spanning almost 30 years, from the first Jurassic Park through to Dominion in 2022. Appearing alongside Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, and Richard Attenborough in the initial 1993 blockbuster, Neill's character is asked to travel to an island near Costa Rica where herds of cloned dinosaurs roam. The circle widened further once you moved outside the Jurassic universe entirely and into Neill's other defining role, the 1989 psychological thriller Dead Calm, which had introduced him to a young actress just starting out in the business, Nicole Kidman. She was 18 when they filmed it together, and by her own account, Neill took on something close to a mentorship role during that shoot that stretched into a decades-long friendship. Speaking to the Sydney Morning Herald after his death, Kidman said she was immensely saddened by the loss, calling him charming, kind, funny, and intelligent. In a separate statement given to People, she went further, calling him one of the greats. Nicole Kidman, who appeared alongside Neill in the 1989 thriller Dead Calm, told the Sydney Morning Herald she was immensely saddened by the actor's death, calling Neill one of the greats and a joy to be around, adding, "We met when I was just 18 and he took me under his wing, and we stayed friends for life." That detail, an 18-year-old newcomer being looked after by her co-star on a tense, claustrophobic thriller set on a boat in the middle of the ocean, tells you something about the reputation Neill carried decades before Jurassic Park turned him into a global name. He wasn't just someone people worked well with. He was someone people leaned on. The tributes kept expanding past his direct collaborators into people who'd only crossed paths with him occasionally, and even they described him in strikingly personal terms. Richard E. Grant, who starred with Neill in a smaller 2019 film, wrote that Neill had guided him through one of the hardest periods of his life. Richard E. Grant, who starred alongside Neill in the 2019 film Palm Beach, paid tribute to the late actor on Instagram, calling Neill an officer and a gentleman in the truest sense, and saying, "He guided and helped me through a very difficult time in my life," adding, "Sail on, kind sir." Toni Collette, who'd worked with Neill on 2 separate films years apart, posted a photo of the two of them together with mutual friends, and a message that read less like an official statement and more like something you'd say standing at a graveside. Toni Collette, who worked with Neill in the films A Long Way Down and Dirty Deeds, shared her own Instagram message honoring her late co-star. "I love you, dear Sam, you hero, you legend, you sweetheart, our great friend. You are already missed so very much. Continue in peace wherever you are. Even actors from smaller, less iconic corners of Neill's 50-year resume showed up. Steven Weber, who worked with Neill on a short-lived American TV drama years earlier, called the news of his death insane and awful, and described a friendship built on more than just professional overlap. Chicago Med star Steven Weber, who worked with Neill on ABC's short-lived drama series Happy Town, called Neill's death insane and awful in a post on Instagram, saying, "We met years back in a show and were friends ever since. Acted together, cooked together." What's striking, laid out end-to-end like this, is the range. This isn't just a list Hollywood mourning one of its own. It's a British actor Neill mentored through a rough patch, a scene partner from a niche American cable drama, a teenage co-star who became a lifelong friend, and the director who made him famous, all independently reaching for the same kind of language. Loyalty, kindness, steadiness. Nobody was calling him merely talented. Everyone was calling him good. If you only knew Sam Neill from Jurassic Park, the size of the tributes might seem disproportionate, but the reactions this week made clear that an entire generation discovered him through a completely different role. Chief Inspector Chester Campbell, the sadistic antagonist of the first 2 seasons of Peaky Blinders. The show's official account posted its own tribute, and it's worth noting how specifically they described what he brought to that character, because it's a description that could apply to almost none of his other roles. The Peaky Blinders team paid tribute to Neill on the show's official Instagram account, writing, "We are devastated to hear that Sam Neill has died." Sam's portrayal of Chester Campbell is one for the ages, a villain who is despicable, petty, manipulative, but also charismatic, vulnerable, funny, and supremely entertaining to watch. Adding, Sam was one of the key forces that got Peaky Blinders off to a running start, for which we will forever be grateful. That's a very different Sam Neill than the one Dern and Spielberg were describing. Chester Campbell was cruel, calculating, borderline unhinged by the end of his run, and yet the show's producers were essentially crediting Neill with getting an entire series, one that's since become a global streaming phenomenon and spawned a sequel order at Netflix. Off the ground in its earliest, most fragile seasons. This range is really the through line of his whole career, and it's exactly what the political tributes picked up on next. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, posted a message on social media that placed Neill's death in a national context, rather than just an industry one. For more than 50 years, he took New Zealand stories to the world, and his talents helped make our film industry into what it is today, one of our greatest. Luxon went further in a longer version of the statement, calling him one of the greats and noting his role in effectively building an industry that barely existed when Neill started out. Sir Sam Neill was one of the greats. New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon wrote on X, "He started out when there was barely a film industry in this country to speak of. For more than 50 years, he took New Zealand stories to the world, and his talents helped make our film industry into what it is today, one of our greatest cultural exports." Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, added his own tribute, framing Neill less as a New Zealand export and more as someone Australia had effectively adopted. Across a career built largely on Australian films and eventually Australian soil, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said Neill had earned a special place in Australian hearts, adding wry and dry, thoughtful and laconic. Sam fought illness with the same dignity, humor, and conviction that gave strength to his every performance. That's 2 sitting heads of government publicly mourning an actor on the same day, within hours of each other. It puts Neill in a category most working actors never reach, someone whose death registers as a national event on 2 separate continents. His career had, in fact, earned exactly the kind of formal recognition that tends to precede that sort of political tribute. He'd been made an officer of the Order of the British Empire back in 1991, and then, decades later, accepted a knighthood in New Zealand's honours system. He'd actually turned down that same honor once before, years earlier, saying it felt too grand a title for him, before eventually accepting it in 2022. even at a New Zealand awards ceremony last year. When he was handed a Screen Legend Award, he leaned into that same self-deprecating instinct rather than accepting the praise at face value, joking that longevity alone was probably enough to qualify him. When he was presented the Screen Legend Award at the 2025 New Zealand Screen Awards, he accepted the honor with his characteristic self-deprecating charm. If you stick around long enough, you probably, qualify, and I've been just sort of sticking around. That quote, more than almost anything said about him this week, captures the tone every single tribute kept circling back to: talent that never curdled into ego. A 50-year career that ran through art films, KGB officers, submarine commanders, Southern Gothic villains, and a knighted dinosaur hunter, delivered by a man who genuinely seemed surprised anyone still cared. And he had reason to be surprised, by his own account. Reflecting on the arc of his career at the 30-year anniversary of the film that made him a household name, Neill described the whole thing as something that had simply happened to him, rather than something he'd engineered. "It's been a very happy, surprising life," Neill told CNN in 2023, on the 30th anniversary of the movie's release. "I never expected to have a career in film at all, or even as an actor. But it kind of happened, and no one's more surprised than me." That combination, enormous talent worn lightly, a 50-year run across 2 different film industries, and a public willingness to laugh at his own fame, is exactly why the reactions this week came from such an unusually wide net. Prime ministers, showrunners, teenage co-stars, turned lifelong friends, directors who'd only worked with him once. Nobody was performing grief for the cameras. They were all, in their own way, describing the same man. What makes the reactions land as hard as they did is the timeline right before his death, because by every account, Sam Neill had spent the last several months looking like a man who'd won. Earlier this year, after a grueling few years of treatment, he'd announced that his cancer was gone. He'd been diagnosed back in 2022 with a rare and aggressive blood cancer, stage 3 angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma, discovered after he noticed swollen glands while doing press for Jurassic World Dominion. In March 2023, Neill revealed that he had been undergoing chemotherapy since March 2022, after being diagnosed with stage 3 angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma, a type of blood cancer following swollen glands that were first noticed during publicity for Jurassic World Dominion. The early treatment didn't go smoothly. He later wrote in his memoir about how the first round of chemotherapy didn't do what it was supposed to. In an interview with The Guardian, Neill said his first round of chemo didn't work very well. His doctors then recommended a new and very expensive chemotherapy drug. The actor signed a contract with the drug company and made a deal. His treatment would be free if he was still alive after 4 months. That's a strikingly blunt, almost comic way to describe negotiating for your own life, and it was consistent with how he talked about the whole ordeal. Dry, matter of fact, refusing to dramatize it more than it already was. By this past spring, after his condition stopped responding to standard chemo, he'd gone through a newer treatment as part of a clinical trial in Australia. CAR T-cell therapy, and the scans that followed showed nothing. In April 2026, Neill said that after his chemotherapy had stopped working, he underwent CAR T-cell therapy as part of an Australian clinical trial. He said a recent scan showed no cancer in his body and advocated for wider access to the treatment for blood cancer patients in Australia and New Zealand. He was, by his own account, and the account of doctors treating him, done with cancer. He didn't slow down either. Just weeks before he died, he was photographed at an Australian awards show looking, by every account, completely fine. And 2 months before that, he'd shared that stage with Goldblum, joking around like a man with decades left in him. That's the timeline that makes sudden and unexpected hit as hard as it did in his family statement. There was no visible decline, no farewell tour, no sense among the people around him that they were watching him for the last time. It's also worth remembering what he'd said on the record about his own relationship with dying, because it adds a layer to how his death is being processed publicly. In an interview a couple years back, he was characteristically unsentimental about the whole subject. In a 2024 interview with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, he said he was not afraid of dying, but it would be very irritating. "I'm not in any way frightened of dying," Neill said. "I'd be annoyed because there are things I still want to do. Very irritating. Dying, but I'm not afraid of it." That's a man who'd made peace with mortality years before it actually arrived, treating it less like a tragedy and more like an inconvenience getting in the way of a to-do list. It's very much in keeping with how his memoir described his outlook. Once he came out of remission the first time, writing with the kind of stubborn, almost defiant optimism that colleagues kept describing this week. "Now I'm a living man, with every intent of going on living and living and living," he wrote in his book. His life outside acting reinforced that same picture, a man who'd built something quiet and permanent for himself away from film sets. He'd started an organic winery in New Zealand's Otago Hills back in the 1990s, with what he described as a fairly modest goal. It was in his beloved rolling Otago Hills where he started his own organic winery, 2 Paddocks, back in 1993, with a mission to produce a good Pinot Noir that his friends and family would enjoy. He named farm animals after his Hollywood friends and posted about them constantly, including, memorably, a Meryl Streep, who met an unfortunate end at the hands of a ferret. He'd also, in his final year, thrown himself into environmental activism, releasing a short documentary opposing a proposed industrial gold mine near his home region, a fight that put him at odds with at least one government minister who publicly called him anti-Kiwi for his opposition. In 2025, New Zealand Resources Minister Shane Jones called Neill wrong and anti-Kiwi for his opposition to an open-cast gold mine proposed near Cromwell. That's the picture that makes the sudden and unexpected phrasing so jarring. This wasn't a man winding down. He was actively fighting a mining project, actively touring with Goldblum, actively posting jokes about his farm animals, actively living like someone with years ahead of him. And then, without warning, he wasn't. In the days since the news broke, the tributes have kept arriving, and taken together they sketch out something closer to a complete portrait than any single obituary could. Neill's family, in the same statement announcing his death, made a point of noting how he'd spent his final years, surrounded by 4 children and 8 grandchildren. A family life he'd once described with typical self-deprecation as somewhat chaotic, given how much of his life was spent overseas on film sets. He was survived by his son Tim, his daughter Elena, his adopted daughter Maiko, and his son Andrew, who Neill had given up for adoption decades earlier and later reconnected with as an adult. Neill was also the grandfather of 8 grandchildren. Neill had 4 children and 8 grandchildren. That reunion with Andrew is its own quiet story buried inside the larger one. A son placed for adoption in Neill's early 20s, found again decades later, and folded back into a family that by every account welcomed him without complication. It's the kind of detail that didn't make many headlines this week, overshadowed by the Jurassic tributes. But it says something about the same man everyone else was describing, someone who kept trying to make things right, even late, even after enormous gaps of time. The scale of what he leaves behind on screen is almost impossible to compress. More than 150 movies and television projects across 5 decades, spanning continents, genres, and mediums. Art house dramas in Australia, blockbuster thrillers in Hollywood, prestige TV in Britain, and a horror franchise about cloned dinosaurs that somehow became the thing children in villages across Asia and Africa would recognize him for on sight. He said as much himself years before his death, describing how universally that one role had traveled. Speaking to Entertainment Weekly in 2013 about the franchise's legacy, Neill said, "I get stopped for different reasons on the street, but Jurassic Park would be the most universal of them. If I go to the Philippines or Rwanda or something, people just know me all around the world, and they'll start roaring like dinosaurs. That's a strange kind of immortality for an actor whose range genuinely spanned from Shakespearean-adjacent period dramas to a KGB officer occupying a defeated United States, to the man who cut off Holly Hunter's finger in a Palme d'Or-winning film about a mute pianist. And yet the dinosaurs are what stuck globally more than anything else he ever did. And he seemed to find that fact more amusing than frustrating right up until the end. Speaking to another outlet a few years back, he marveled at how a role he'd shot in a matter of weeks had somehow calcified into a permanent piece of pop culture. He told Forbes in 2022 that never imagined the blockbuster would become so iconic. People can quote the lines, he said. Alan Grant taking off his dark glasses to see things has become a meme. You just do them at the time, and then 30 years later, it's still part of people's lives. It's baffling, really. That bafflement is, in its own way, the last piece of the puzzle that ties every single tribute together. Every person who spoke this week, Dern, Spielberg, Goldblum by association, Trevorrow, Urban, Kidman, Collette, Grant, Weber, 2 prime ministers, a television production, and a movie studio, was, in some form, describing a man who never quite believed his own scale of fame, and who used that disbelief to stay kind, stay curious, and stay generous with the people around him for 50 straight years. The Jurassic Park franchise itself isn't going anywhere. Universal has more dinosaurs planned, more sequels in motion, more of the world Neill helped build back in 1993 still to come. But the specific alchemy that made the original trio work, Neill's skepticism, Dern's optimism, Goldblum's chaos, all set against Spielberg's instinct for spectacle. That particular combination existed for exactly 3 films across 29 years, and it's now permanently, irreversibly complete. What's left is what Spielberg promised in his statement the day the news broke. A Jurassic family that will keep talking about him, keep quoting him, keep telling the story of the man who made the loneliest, grumpiest scientist in the franchise into the character audiences loved the most. Sam Neill built a career on being underestimated by his own characters and overestimated by no one who actually knew him. That's the story his colleagues told this week, one statement at a time, and it's the story that's likely to outlast every dinosaur